As the system notified Junio that his stored polluted mana has been depleted, his stamina will also be drastically consumed as a penalty. As a result, his familiar, Elizabeth Bathory in her complete form, had only 10 seconds until her summoning was cancelled. As droplets of Junio's blood exude on the ground, Junio held his chest tightly as he breathlessly stared at the hunter-killer. And with a tinge of disappointment, he thought of what he had earned in a critical damage was able to summon Elizabeth for a brief moment. However, it was enough time to draw an end to this fierce fight. On the other end, Elizabeth stared at the hunter-killer with a nonchalant expression. The hunter-killer gritted his teeth as the corrupted mana loosens. And upon his release, he immediately sends Whirlwind Sword Aura at Elizabeth, who smiles mockingly as the attack was neutralized with another skill, named Fog. The hunter-killer flinched as he saw his attack blocked casually like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth commented on how his attacks aren't scary or enough as Tihian, although it seems to be of a similar type as him. There's a bit of a difference in levels, and the weapon Tihian used was also part of it. And with that, Elizabeth's time was up. At the same time, Moon Dojin uses this brief opening and dashes towards the hunter-killer from behind with a murderous aura. The hunter-killer noticed, turned around and swung his sword. However, it was too late as Moon Dojin deflects it with his dagger at close range, then delivered a powerful attack on his own, cleaving through his arm like hot knife through butter. As Elizabeth's summon was cleared, she taunted the hunter-killer for the last time before her body dematerialized into thin air. With his amputated hand oozing blood and the other holding his sword, the hunter-killer took a defensive stance as he turns his attention to Moon Dojin, who faced him with his daggers raised. Moon Dojin silently thought that due to the huge gap in their basic skills, killing this guy in his current situation was still a difficult task, but he had a chance. If this fight was to proceed, he can at least fatally wound him. And with that, Moon Dojin gave the hunter-killer a chance to surrender if he wanted to live. It was no skin off his back whichever decision he made. Hearing this, the hunter-killer was drenched in cold sweat as his face turns ugly. He drops his sword, which was a clear act of surrendering, but Moon Dojin instantaneously knew that he had a different intention. The hunter-killer reached into his breast pocket for something. Moments later, in his hand was a teleportation crystal emitting corrupted mana. This alerted Junio immediately as he tried to figure out what it was. At the same time, the hunter-killer crashes the crystal, and with that a teleportation formation began to form underneath his feet. Moon Dojin noticed and immediately launched at him, and while in midair, the teleportation formation was activated after it was fully formed emitting corrupted mana. He lands at the exact spot moment later with his dagger, narrowing missing his target. Damn it, he cursed loudly as he gritted his teeth in frustration. Junio approached him, wiping the blood off his mouth. He commented that it was a relief that it was simply an escape-use item. If it was an attack or debuff item, regardless of the results, they wouldn't be in one piece. Moon Dojin turned slightly to face Junio. And Junio, with a tinge of regret, said he will narrate everything that happened to his brother and his guild, deeming it that Moon Dojin had the right to know. A while later, at the entrance of the gate, the association's medical team hurriedly wheeled the dead bodies of the hunters outside before the gate closes. However, Moon Dojin, with a gloomy expression, expresses how horrible he feels about the incident and why they had to lie about the hunter's cause of death. They both agreed to report what happened to the association as monster killings inside the dungeon. Junio looked at him and replied that they had no choice given their circumstance. According to the security personnel, they initially thought the party had only 7 members. But a few minutes later, someone with an access card entered the gate belatedly and killed everyone except them. Whichever way you look at it, there is no way that story wasn't sketchy from a third perspective. However, that unbelievable thing actually happened, and the certificate that was forged was also good enough to fool the security personnel. Junio was quick to reprimand him. No. Perhaps it was a real access pass like I explained earlier. It was the same as a year ago with your brother's guild, since an unconfirmed dungeon was openly bid at a certified auction. I don't know their goal, but this isn't a scale that a small group could possibly do, since if the association caught on, this organization would have been evaporated immediately. It must be an important figure that wouldn't get caught even after fooling the association. Or perhaps it's someone big enough that it wouldn't matter if they get caught. I'm sure you also have a basic understanding that that bastard we just faced wasn't just anyone, and we have no idea who is backing him. That's why they even lied to the guild's family members, including you, because there might be some among them who might not have been able to accept it. And with that explanation, Moon Dojin looks visibly downhearted and said that even if they were to officially report it to the association, these people might get hurt, was what he's implying. With a soft sigh, Moon Dojin replied that he gets it. But there was still a question he would like to ask. That ability of yours wasn't a D-rank weapon maker. Why are you hiding it? Junio stared at him sternly and replied that if he go into details, it will take too long. But until a year ago, his abilities was useless. What he could only make was a sword or two, and it was to the point that even being called a D-rank was embarrassing. However, at the unconfirmed dungeon, he awakened a new ability while on the verge of death. And thanks to that, he was the only one who survived. Of course, similar to this incident, it's unrealistic, and he understood that it would sound suspicious if he reported the truth. If the role was reversed, he would also have a hard time believing it. And with that, Junio lowered his head, bowing and apologizing sincerely, saying that when the main culprit and the truth behind everything is uncovered, he planned on revealing everything to the world and the families. Though it wouldn't justify the fact that he concealed the truth. One day, he would definitely find those responsible for Moon Dojin's brother's death. Moon Dojin, who seemed a bit stunned, commented, "Find them? Don't act like this problem is only related to you." And with that, he turned to leave, continuing that exempting the fact that he wasn't the culprit. There wasn't anything that he would accept other than seeing this to the end. And now he was no different from him, since even though he saw the truth with his own eyes, he needs to keep his mouth shut to those who have the right to hear it. Moon Dojin vowed to never stop until he had made those who killed his brother pay with their lives. He will chase them down and delete them no matter what. Until then, he's in Junio's care. Regardless, from this point onwards, they were to only count on each other. Meanwhile, in a dilapidated abandoned factory, the teleportation formation appeared as corrupted mana lights the place with purple light. In it was the hunter-killer, who was furious in a pathetic state. He falls on his knees, and with veins popping out of his cheeks and neck, he shouts about how he intends to make Junio pay 1,000,000 times fold for this humiliation. Just then the priestess came in, and as she approached him, she said that running away after being defeated was really a pathetic sight. Placing a finger on her cheek, she continued that it would have been better for her if he'd returned dead, because his corpse would have made a great sacrifice. Before he could reply, she waved her hand dismissively that he doesn't need to whine about his defeat like a wounded dog. After all, a certain person was still expecting many things from him. And as she continued to casually wave her hand, an ugly meat-like ball with eyes and razor teeth engulfed and polluted mana appeared in front of him. Shocked, the hunter-killer asked what it was. The priestess smiled brightly and replied that he should just eat it and would regret it if he refused. Then she continued, saying that her child has the power to regrow his arm. Still bleeding profusely, the hunter-killer refused to eat it, claiming he wasn't an idiot to digest something without even knowing what it was. Really, I understand that we don't have a trusting relationship, but being picky only works if you have the power to refuse. As the priestess stared with a cold gaze, the hunter-killer gritted his teeth in frustration. He then took the polluted item and swallowed it in one gulp. Then, his eyes immediately shot up, and with that a loud scream echoed throughout the entire factory. As the scream stops, the hunter-killer was visibly shaking, and in disbelief, he was staring at his new arm, which had polluted mana bulging out in his veins. Seeing the results, the priestess commented on how the two were a perfect match, and if he didn't like her child, he could just say it and she can do whatever she wants. At this point, the hunter-killer was enraged, and still gritting his teeth, he remembered his humiliation and vowed to make Elizabeth, Moon Dojin, and especially Junio pay in every way possible. The scene shifts to an airport the next day, where several security details were on alert and stationed at the entrance. Seeing the intense and the unusual level of security, reporters, and all the cameras at the airport in frenzy, a lady at the terminal asked her counterpart if a celebrity was coming to the airport. No, it's not a celebrity but a hunter. You know the Hyunwoo Guild, right? Apparently, it's one of the biggest 3 guilds in the country. Then, with an expression on her face that seemed to be in thoughts, she replied that she heard about it. She then asked, wondering why such a huge guild was entering through the airport when they were a guild from this country anyway. The guy took out his phone, and as he reads the articles about the subject in question, he replied that there was a special invitation from the United Kingdom about a very dangerous and difficult gate. The reporters immediately began asking numerous questions in quick succession when they saw Hyunwoo Guildmaster, Woo Hyan. As Hyan, a stunning blonde lady, walked out of the airport, she nonchalantly ignored the frantic reporters as her assistant dealt with them. She told the reporters that they were not accepting interviews at this time, and will only respond through an official press conference later on. On the road, she briefed Hyan of her schedule for the day. Looking at the car window, Hyan flinched instantly hearing that the hunter-killer, named the Executor, was sighted 2 days ago. Turning to face her assistant, Hyan asked where. An error dungeon in Bupyeong, and according to the witness statement and testimony of the barricade members in charge, there was someone who appeared later to a dungeon than the others, and his appearance matches up with that of existing reports of the Executor. According to the association, there were 2 survivors. One is a B-ranked assassin and the other, a D-ranked supporter. Repeating what she just heard, Hyan wondered out loud how a D-ranked supporter could survive the Executor. Was the B-ranked assassin's abilities anything extraordinary? Her assistant replied that she didn't know, but they both testified that the death of their party members were accidents that occurred during the hunt. Holding her chin in her hand, Hyan thought that there were several possible explanations why these 2 survivors were still alive. One could be that they were on the same side as the Executor, The other could be that they were threatened with a variety of things which became a means for them to live. Stopping mid-thought, Hyan told her assistant to add a meeting with the two survivors to her schedule. The scene shifted again to Junsio's apartment complex. At this time, Junseo was searching the Hunters Association records for the executor. Unfortunately, he found nothing. Though it was expected, Junseo wondered that the executor was really not an official recorded hunter. Due to this, he goes around with a different appearance every time. Then, in deep thought, he knew that what he can be sure of at this moment was the executor was definitely related to the annihilation incidents that occurred in unconfirmed and rank error dungeons. Furthermore, the existence of rank error dungeons themselves may be the work of the organization that he belongs to. And even the case of the estate that Elizabeth was in could have annihilated all of the participating hunters, including Taehyun. Based on abilities and potential of all the people who were in that raid, they all could have risen to become heroes later. If they really had been annihilated, then it would have been a huge loss to this world's future. The fact that they aren't stopping at forging dungeon ranks and sending in assassins separately means that there's a possibility that acts of assassination will occur outside dungeons as well. Just then, his phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. On the other room, Elizabeth seems to be taking a nap unbothered by the noise. Junseo was a bit puzzled, wondering who the unknown caller might be as he picks up the call. The scene changes a while later under a brightly dim night. In a luxurious building, Kang Yuran, dressed in an elegantly straight dress, waits on Junseo's arrival at the bar. And upon his arrival, she looked at Junseo disappointingly, commenting on how she was expecting him to dress in a tidier outfit given the occasion. Looking around, Junseo was neither bothered nor did he cared about such things. He replied that he neither planned nor thought of coming to a place like this before in the first place. Anyway, I have become more distrustful towards society as the day goes by. And with a serious expression, he asked Kang Yuran that he neither recalled giving his address or phone number to the public, nor was it in the association database. Hearing Junseo mentioning address, Kang Yuran was quick to catch on that Kim Yi-hyuk had seek him out to recruit him. Well, it was an obvious move on his part. He probably came looking for you with that greasy smile and unfounded confidence of his. With a flirtatious demeanor, she told Junseo that she invited him for personal reasons. Didn't you come because you had interest or business with me? Without waiting for a reply, Kang Yuran asked Junseo to sit and have a drink with her. He need not to worry about the bill, she will pay. Junseo, with a neutral expression, said that the conversation wasn't leisure to talk over a drink. And if she had nothing specific to say, he will state his business plainly and leave. Well, I called you here because I was curious. As you know, I fainted and couldn't see the end of the raid. What method did you use to defeat that monster? Even if it was Taehyun, based on his condition at that time, there was no hope. Junseo Cyan replied that she should be asking Taehyun that question. After all, he's just a D-ranked supporter with no fighting abilities. In a situation where you were unconscious, there was no way I could have grasped the situation. All I did was use the remaining of my energy to create a sword. I don't know anything else. Hearing this, Kang Yuran asked Junseo what he wanted to say to her, and with that, Junseo narrated everything to her. Although absurd, it's quite amusing. A crazy bastard using a great sword is going around hunting hunters. And the likely next target is me? Stretching his arm, Junseo replied that if his predictions are correct, yes. The fact that she entered a rank error dungeon means that she's her target. Also, given that she isn't affiliated with any guild, indicate that as well. Kang Yuran looked at Junseo quizzically and replied that seemed plausible. But aren't you forgetting something important? When it comes down to it, it's not just me. You also aren't affiliated with any guild and weaker than me. If what you're saying is true, aren't you the one who is really in a dangerous situation? Placing a finger delicately on her lips, she continued, asking, what do you think? If you're okay with it, I can protect you. And with that, Junseo turned to leave, commenting that he had said all he needed to say. As he took a few steps, he turned back and said she should take what he said seriously as her life depended on it. And with that, he left. Immediately after, Kang Yuran got on the phone and called the executor, signaling him to act. As she talks, traces of corrupted mana was visible around her. Ending the call, she commented she had time to watch the show after all. As Junseo heads out to his apartment, a shadowy figure approached him. The executor commented first as he approached Junseo, who was immediately alarmed hearing his voice. I don't know about anything else, but I'll acknowledge your guts. I didn't think you actually would, but only a few days passed and you're traveling at night alone. Are you really that thoughtless and idiotic? As veins bulge out on his face, he continued, saying vindicatively that he will be upfront about the fact that it was pointless if Junseo run away or screamed for help. The barrier was set up that nobody will know what was happening inside. They were trapped in a virtual space that imitates reality called Dark Territory. A few distance away was the Priestess, who was watching the scene with interest. With a calm demeanor, Junseo commented on the virtual space, saying that nothing can leave this space until one of them was dead, right? Hearing this, the executor was shocked, taken aback about the fact that Junio knew everything about dark territory and corrupted mana. Then, he continued that dark territory not only blocks entry, so he was a bit worried that he couldn't feel any presence. Thinking that the executor might have killed those who lived here, it's a relief that just as capable as you are, your organization also has a level of discernment. When he was done, Junio said to the executor that he was expecting something like this to an extent. He knew full well that he would aim for him, and the ambush might also happen tonight. Just as someone said earlier, he was the perfect person to aim for. Hearing enough, the executor gritted his teeth, took out his sword and swung it, releasing a whirlwind sword aura at Junio. The attack was massive as it created a huge explosion. However, the executor was surprised greatly as he stared ahead when the dust subsided. In front of Junio was a massive sword, about 4 feet tall, acting as a shield, blocking the attack as it bore the full force of it. Seeing this, the executor wondered how is it possible. This attack wasn't a half-assed blow like last time. Most with a fighting class would have died immediately. Meanwhile, as the massive sword dematerialized, Junio said that this was the first time in a year that he was able to fight one-on-one with an enemy without having to worry about any witnesses. Then, the executor dashes forward with his sword pointed at Junio. He replied that it didn't matter that he was able to block the attack just now. After all, he's a supporter that can't do anything on his own. Hearing this, Junio replied in agreement that he wasn't totally wrong, so he should check this out then. Then he stretched out his hand, his eyes turning shades of blue in a grid form. And with that, he activated the skill, Grid World. Meanwhile, outside the barrier was a car, and in it was Hyan and her assistant. Opening the door, Hyan stepped out and looked at the area for any sign of abnormality. She wondered how there was no indication of a gate, but she can feel corrupted mana emitting from this area. Then we get a brief insight on her class. Wu Hyan's class is Saint. It is a class that is considered middle-upper ranked among the support classes, and they typically use general mana as well as a more distinct mana signature called Divine Power. Divine Power is considered to be the opposite of corrupted mana, so some Saint classes may not be able to see corrupted mana, but can sense it. Just then, her assistant came behind her holding a staff. She asked whether they should report this situation to the association. A residential area emitting corrupted mana was a clear sign that the place was dangerous for ordinary humans. No. For now, let's not. Hyan replied as she grabbed her staff. She continued that she needs only 30 minutes, and when she wasn't back by then, she should report to the association. Fusing her staff with divine power, Hyan heads towards the barrier, which was camouflaged as the exact scene as the residential area. As Hyan approached the wall, her assistant wondered why she was heading directly towards a thick wall. Is she perhaps seeing something I'm not? With her mouth wide open, she gasped in disbelief as Hyan plunged her hand in the wall. Then seconds later, her entire body followed as she disappeared completely, phasing through it without any resistance. As the assistant was visibly shaking, she approached the wall cautiously, wondering how her guild master, along with her presence, had disappeared instantly with a trace. Looking visibly distressed as she gritted her teeth, she hopes nothing really bad happens to her. At this time, huge explosions were occurring continuously within the barrier. As Junio directs his sword towards the executor, who clenched his teeth violently as he tried unsuccessfully to counter with his sword. But at the point of impact, the sword changes its course slightly and aimed at him. The executor, noticing this at the last second, barely dodged it as the sword whooshed past him at lightning speed. Staring at Junio with an annoyed expression, the executor was about to comment that Junio's pathetic tricks were ineffective against him. But before he could even get a word in, he noticed a mana grenade behind him. A mana grenade was a firepower weapon that was used by army forces against monsters. As it went off with a loud bang, Junio stared at the scene with a focused gaze, and with his arms still outstretched and open-palmed, general mana was flowing out of him in a steady manner. The priestess watched the entire scene and wondered silently how Junio was good enough to have piqued her interest. Also, Junio will definitely be a troublesome opponent if he was left alive. There is nothing that's amazing about the function of the weapons he materializes. They are simply strong and sharp weapons, but the user can only demonstrate special abilities while wielding it themselves. It must have been created with a focus on physical ability. What's incredible about it is the one who is using those weapons. He's not just throwing the weapons he materialized, but the speed and angle, power and pacing are excellent enough that even the executor is having a hard time. Furthermore, he's also materializing firearms, and has the good sense to use them at the right time and place. He's not just outstanding as a maker, but his application and use of skills is amazing. It would be impossible if he didn't have the experience of someone who is on the level of a veteran. I can't believe a monster like this was staying hidden until now. Watching the executor cough loudly in a sorry state, Junio commented on how ineffective Mana Grenade is to monsters above C rank since the strength and toughness are of a different story. However, it has the opposite effect on humans, and being caught off guard exponentially increases the damage. Being brutally battered, the executor gritted his teeth furiously and began to curse, but was cut off by Junio. Moments later, he was caught defenseless and off guard again as countless swords were aimed at him in midair. With a clench of his fist, the sword shot directly at the executor, causing a loud explosion. He then blocks the gush of dusty wind with his hand as he watched the explosion. Junio flinched instantly, sensing an immense polluted mana emitting from the executor. The executor dropped his sword, and with a pained expression on his face, he gritted his teeth as his regress arm began to change shape. On the other side, the priestess, overflowing with polluted mana, stretched her hand and with a menacing smile, said to herself that since her colleague is in danger, it's only beneficial to help him, right? If she knew about this beforehand, this problem would have been taken care of from the beginning. With his hand transformed into a humanoid scythe, the executor, emitting immense polluted mana, was ready for another round. Seeing this new development, Junio was now convinced about his suspicion of the executor's right arm, which was cut off days earlier, was not regrown by a skill. With the way he currently emitting this much polluted mana, he must have consumed something aberrant. And with that thought, he materializes a giant sword and shot it towards the executor, who cleaved through it like it was nothing. The force of his side arm created a huge aura which was aimed directly at Junio. Seeing this enormous attack heading towards him, Junio countered with a huge shield of his own, blocking it with much needed effort as he looks visibly nervous. As the fight progresses, the priestess was confident that Junio's constant materialization of strong weapons wouldn't be enough to defeat the executor. But she paused mid-sentence when she noticed Junio pull a small crystal from his jacket pocket. We then get a flashback to the day Junio signed the contract with the Overkill Guild to be his benefactor. The box was a gift from Tihian, and in it was the small crystal called the Arachne's Bloodstone. It was the bloodstone that contained the boss monster, Arachne's final cries. And upon taking this item, the user can become the same class as the one who dealt the final blow to Arachne for a minute. The skill and rank of aptitude will be the same as the user, and when the limited time ends, the user will lose 99% stamina or the remaining of it. Staring at the bloodstone in his hand, Junio swallowed it in one gulp. Meanwhile, the executor, clouded with rage, dashes towards Junio with killing intent. As he was moments away from slicing Junio with his side hand, the Arachne's Bloodstone was activated, making Shin Junio's class and rank of aptitude the same as Yun Tihian. Junio stretched his hand, and upon collision with the executor, who flinched and continued to grit his teeth thoughtlessly, saw his arm blocked casually with a sword. Activating the skill, Explode, Junio commented that round 2 of their fight has begun. Junio was engulfed in flames as he holds a huge sword. Upon seeing this sight, the priestess was shocked greatly as she wondered how it was possible. She can roughly guess what item Junio swallowed. It was a temporary class change through an item of the Bloodstone affiliation. The physical strength and energy Junio had was something temporary that he had obtained through it. But that weapon, how is it that I can feel corrupted mana from it? Could it be that he received power from that person? How can an ordinary hunter use corrupted mana? However, after Elizabeth Estate raid, there was 0 corrupted mana saved by Junio. But due to the small quantity of corrupted mana in Arachne's Bloodstone, Junio's mana absorption skill was activated. His accumulated corrupted mana was 20 and general mana was 100. And with that little corrupted mana he obtained, he activated his skill, Demon Weapon Production. As the system searched for a suitable weapon from the demonic realm, the executor dashes towards him at lightning speed. And in that moment, the production was complete and a huge sword, Fragarak, materialized in Junio's hand. The executor, milliseconds away from striking Junio, halted slightly in his tracks as he felt the immense power emitting from the sword. Junio, with his sword raised in flames, blocked the humanoid scythe arm leisurely. As multiple sparks were visible when the two weapons clash, Junio had the upper hand. He swung his sword as a wave of flames struck the executor, sending him several meters back. Gritting his teeth, his humanoid scythe arm was visibly shaken due to the head-on clash with Fragarak earlier. Without offering no chance of respite, the executor looked up as Junio jumped several meters high, and while in midair, Fragarak in hand, struck the ground where the executor was initially standing. Though he dodged that overwhelming strike, its shockwave was enough to deal a few injuries. Like a shadow, Junio was again directly in front of the executor, dealing another powerful blow to which the executor, left with no choice, had to bore the full force of it. The priestess placed her hand on her chin in frustration and watched the battle closely. Sensing something amiss, she thought of how Junio class change wasn't an issue, but how his skills and movement proficiency almost seems as if he's been wielding a sword for a long time was mind-boggling. Her question was reasonable as the Bloodstone. Although it did make class change possible, it didn't however provide experience or proficiency. After all, Junio's previous life also didn't have a melee class, so it would make more sense for him not to have any fighting experience. So she did have a point. However, the demonic sword, Fragarak, In comparison to Leviathan that Taehyun wielded before was just one stage lower when it came to destructive power as a weapon. Unlike Leviathan, which specialized in fire power, Fragarak had the ability as a demonic sword. As the fight rages on, Junio felt like he was entranced by something, making his senses and consciousness clear. And it wasn't Junio moving his body but the sword. Even the thought of doing something was executed perfectly by it. The demonic sword that encroaches the wielder with its own will. Ironically enough, Junio's movement alone had the best compatibility with the sword. And with that, another wave of flames crushed down on the executor, momentarily distorting his sight. As he got his bearings back, he noticed with a surprised expression that Junio had disappeared from where he was a moment ago. In an instant, he was behind him, midair and exuding with killing intent. Junio sliced the back of the executor, causing him to spurt a mouthful of blood. The remnant of the attack was still visible as the executor laid on the floor, momentarily unconscious. As Junio watched the executor's laying form, he immediately felt his whole body get drained of energy. And with that, he drops his sword and fell to the ground, struggling to stay conscious. He knew that his 1 minute was up, but as the executor got on his feet, and noticing Junio's crouching figure, he dashes towards him, hoping to end this fight in one attack. However, based on the executor's condition, Junio knew he got only a slight chance to land a fatal wound. So he stretched out his hand, and in that moment, a massive beam of golden light descended on the approaching executor. Junio got up and watched the scene, questioning himself. Is that divine power? His thoughts were cut off as Hyan appeared behind him. Shin Junio, right? I have a lot I want to ask you, but this isn't the situation where we can have a talk. The executor roars loudly as he knelt down with divine power restraining him. Moments later, he regained his consciousness, and upon realizing what had happened, he started cursing the priestess loudly, asking for help. This scene equally surprised and confused both Junio and Hyan. Well then, I guess I have no choice, so be it. And with those words, a massive guillotine appeared as the executor was moment away from being executed. Junio and Hyan just stared at the scene, and with a surprised expression, the blade was released as the executor's head was detached from his body. Again, Junio and Hyan just stood there with an expressionless face at the sight. I didn't expect this to happen, but I did think that this pathetic human might suffer. The priestess commented as she elegantly lands near the executor's corpse. She continued that the executor was really worthless until the very end. However, she was cut off by Hyan, who threatened her to get on her knees and put both of her hands on her head. Hearing this, the priestess smiled mockingly and asked what she was going to do if she refused. Hyan did not like hearing this, and as she clenched her teeth in anger, another massive beam of divine power crashed down on the priestess. Hyan watched as the divine power dissipates. However, she was shocked to see the priestess unharmed, protected under a dome she created. The priestess took out a teleportation crystal, and as she activated the formation, her departing words were that she gave in to the demand of the idiotic executor, but she doesn't plan on wasting energy on fights that person hasn't commanded. However, the next time she returns, she'll dress this idiotic executor much more gloriously. And with that, they were teleported from there. Immediately after, Junio knelt on the floor, shaking profusely. Then seconds later, he collapsed, drawing Hyan's attention.